sun scorch her bones. Eliza lay sprawled on the cracked earth, the weight of the desert pressing down, the weight inside her tearing up. A contraction seized her, brutal and silent, squeezing breath and hope into dust. Around her, the vast, indifferent emptiness of the Arizona territory shimmered. For small figures huddled by the broken wagon, its wheels shattered like her trust. Her children, her husband, Silas, was gone. He'd ridden off hours ago, leaving her to birth this child alone under the merciless sky. The only sound was the dry rattle of scrub brush and the ragged pull of her own breath. Survival felt like a dare whispered against the wind. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I got something extra special saved just for you. Eliza's fingers clawed uselessly at the hard-packed dirt as the pain receded, leaving a trembling exhaustion in its wake. Sweat stung her eyes, mingling with tears she refused to shed. Not yet, not in front of them. She lifted her head, a monumental effort. Dust coated her tongue, gritty and thick. Tom. Her voice emerged a rasp. The eldest, 12 years etched too early onto his face, scrambled closer. His eyes, wide and dark like hers, darted between her and the empty horizon where his father had vanished. He clutched the dented canteen, the canteen. Silas had drained the last good water before mounting up. He took the money, Mama. Ben 10 asked quietly, crouching beside Tom. His gaze was fixed on the frayed leather pouch Eliza usually wore hidden beneath her skirt, now conspicuously absent. Silas hadn't just taken water. He'd taken the meager savings sewn into the pouch's lining, coins hoarded from selling eggs, mending clothes, the promise of future. He'd taken a rifle, the only real protection against coyotes, or worse. He'd taken the spare mule. Eliza closed her eyes, the betrayal fresh knife twist beneath the labor pains. She remembered Silas's face this morning, tight with strange, simmering anger as he surveyed the broken wagon axle. Can't fix it proper here, he'd muttered, avoiding her eyes. Got a ride to Mesquite Flats. Fetch the wheelwright. A lie, smooth as river stone. Mesquite Flats was 2 days west. He'd saddled the good mule, packed the rifle, the water skins, and then, with chilling casualness, reached for her, his hand rough on her waist, dipping into the hidden pocket beneath her layers. His eyes, when they met hers, held no apology, only a cold finality. You're a burden. All of you. He hadn't spoken the words, but they echoed in the empty space he left behind as he spurred the mule south, not west, disappearing into the heat haze without a backward glance. South, towards Mexico, towards escape. Another wave of pain crashed over her, sharper, deeper. A low groan escaped her clenched teeth. 7-year-old Lily whimpered, pressing her face into Eliza's sweat-damp shoulder. Mama hurts, she whispered. I know, sugar, Tom murmured, his voice cracking with the weight of responsibility far beyond his years. He awkwardly patted Lily's back with one hand while offering the near-empty canteen to Eliza with the other. Sip, Mama, just a little. The water was warm, tasting faintly of metal and dust. It barely wet her throat. Eliza's gaze swept over her children. Ben, trying to be brave, chewing his lip raw. Lily, trembling. Little Sam, just 4, sat silently beside the useless wagon wheel, tracing a finger through the dust, his face pale beneath its grime. Too young to fully grasp the horror, only the fear radiating from the others. They were parched, hungry, exposed, and she was helpless, pinned by the relentless demands of the life, struggling to enter this unforgiving world. Despair, thick and suffocating as a desert air, threatened to drown her. How could she bring a baby into this? How could she keep them alive? The sun beat down, a physical hammer blow. The cracked earth offered no shelter, no comfort. Buzzards circled high above, patient scribes against the bleached parchment of the sky. She imagined Silas miles away, maybe already trading their coins for whiskey and oblivion. The image brought a surge of bitter fury. hotter than the sun. He hadn't just abandoned her. He condemned them all. He meant for us to die. The thought was ice in her veins. Left in the deepest stretch of the Sonoran scrub, miles from any known trail or waterhole, with a broken wagon and no supplies, it wasn't neglect. It was a sentence. "Tom!" She gasped as the pain ebbed again, leaving her shaking. The blanket under the wagon seat, get it? She couldn't birth this child directly onto the burning sand. Tom scrambled to obey, hauling out the thin, scratchy wool blanket. He spread it awkwardly beside her, his movements jerky with fear. Ben helped, his small hands trembling as he smoothed the rough fabric. Lily clung tighter. Eliza tried to shift onto the blanket, but her body felt leaden, disconnected. The heat was a living thing, pressing in, stealing her breath. Her vision blurred at the edges. "Get up. You have to get up." But the next contraction was already building, a monstrous wave gathering force deep within. She braced, digging her elbows into the dirt, a strangled cry tearing from her throat. The children flinched. Sam started to cry, a thin, frightened sound that scraped against Eliza's raw nerves. "Shoo! Sammy!" Ben whispered, moving to his little brother's side, wrapping an arm around him. Mama's working hard." Tom knelt beside Eliza's head, wiping her forehead with the corner of his shirt. His touch was tentative, scared. What do we do, Mama?" The question hung in the air, heavy with the unspoken terror. "When the baby comes, when the water's gone, when the sun sets and the cold comes." Eliza couldn't answer. The pain was cresting, immense, all-consuming. It pushed everything else aside, the fear, the betrayal, the scorching sun. There was only this primal, tearing urgency. She bore down, a guttural sound ripping from her chest, her body arching against the unforgiving ground. The world narrowed to fire and pressure, and the desperate need to expel this life into a world seemingly bent on extinguishing it. Dimly, through the haze of agony, she heard Lily sob, "Mama," and Tom's sharp intake of breath. Then, a new sound pierced the oppressive silence, distant, rhythmic, metallic. Hoofbeats, slow, deliberate, not the frantic gallop of Silas returning in remorse. Something else. Eliza froze mid-contraction. Hope was a dangerous, treacherous thing out here. Bandits? Drifters? Worse? Fear, colder than the deepest well, washed over her. She was utterly vulnerable, legs splayed, children clustered like frightened chicks. Her hands scrabbled uselessly at the dirt where the rifle should have been. Tom's head snapped up, his body tensing like a cornered animal. He shuffled instinctively closer to Eliza and Lily, placing his thin frame between them and the approaching sound. The hoofbeats grew louder, steady. A shadow fell across the huddled group, long and distorted by the late afternoon sun. Eliza squinted up, shielding her eyes against the glare. A horse, tall and dust-colored. A man. He sat tall in the saddle, his face obscured by the brim of a worn hat and the harsh light behind him. He didn't speak immediately, just surveyed the scene, the broken wagon, the exhausted woman in the throes of labor, the terrified children. His gaze lingered on the empty rifle scabbard lashed to the wagon frame. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic counterpoint to the fading echoes of the contraction. Was this rescue, or merely a different kind of end? The man's stillness was unnerving. He nudged his horse a step closer, the animal snorting softly, tossing its head. Dust motes danced in the slanting light. Finally, he swung down from the saddle with practiced ease that spoke of a life spent on horseback. He was lean, weathered, perhaps in his 40s, his clothes faded but sturdy. He moved slowly, deliberately, keeping his hands visible, palms open and empty. His eyes, when they met Eliza's, were a startlingly clear blue, etched with lines that spoke of sun and sorrow. They held no threat, only a deep, assessing gravity. He took in her sweat-streaked face, the strain that surrounded her mouth, the protective huddle of the children. He saw the truth of it. Abandonment. Desperation. Without a word, he reached back to his saddlebag, pulling out a large, canvas-covered canteen. The sloshing sound it made was the sweetest music Eliza had ever heard. He uncorked it and knelt a respectful distance away, holding out towards Tom. "Water," he said, his voice a low rumble, rough as unworked stone, yet devoid of malice. His eyes never left Eliza's face, acknowledging her pain, her fear, the monumental effort trembling through her body. A simple word, offered without demand or judgment. A lifeline thrown across the abyss of Silas's cruelty. But in the quiet desert, with the shadows lengthening and the memory of her husband's departing back still raw, Eliza couldn't banish the chilling thought. What comes after the water? The baby stirred again, insistent within her. The rancher's gaze held hers, steady, waiting. The respite was fragile, thin as desert ice. The canteen hovered between them, water sloshing like a promise. Eliza's gaze locked onto the rancher's blue eyes, weathered as desert stone yet clear as the sky before a storm. Another contraction seized her, a vice tightening low in her belly, stealing her breath. She arched, a raw gasp tearing through her clenched teeth. The children flinched. Tom lunged forward, snatching the canteen from the rancher's outstretched hand, his own trembling as he held it to Eliza's cracked lips. The water was cool, a shock against the desert's furnace breath. It barely touched the thirst, but the act, the deliberate offering, eased a fraction of the primal fear coiling in her chest. "Ben," the rancher said, his voice low and calm, cutting through Lily's muffled sobs. "That blanket. Fold it. Make it thick here." He gestured to a patch of slightly softer sand near the wagon's meager shadow. His movements were economical, unhurried, radiating a competence that felt alien after Silas's volatile unpredictability. Ben scrambled to obey, his small hands smoothing the rough wool with desperate care. The rancher knelt beside Eliza, not touching her, his presence a solid wall between her and the vast, uncaring emptiness. "Name's Caleb Hart," he stated, simply. "My spread's 3 miles north. Can you stand?" His eyes held hers, acknowledging the agony, the impossible choice, move or birth here on the burning ground. Eliza shook her head, sweat stinging her eyes. The pressure built again, inexorable, demanding. "Now it's coming now." The words were a ragged whisper. Fear war with a dawning, desperate trust. He hadn't drawn a weapon. He'd given water. His hands, resting loosely on his knees, were broad, scarred, but clean. Caleb nodded, a single dip at his chin. "All right." He shrugged out of his faded denim jacket, rolling it into a makeshift bolster. "Tom, support her shoulders. Ben, hold your sister's hand. Lily, sugar, look at me." Lily's tear-filled eyes lifted, wide with terror. "Your mama's strong as bedrock. You watch. You see." His words weren't soft, but they held a bedrock certainty that stilled the girl's trembling for a heartbeat. Sam, silent and wide-eyed, burrowed into Ben's side, his thumb in his mouth. Eliza bore down, the world narrowing to fire and pressure and Caleb Hart's steady presence. His hands, when they finally touched her knee to help guide her position, were warm and firm, devoid of any hesitation or revulsion. He didn't flinch at the blood, the sweat, the raw animal sound she couldn't suppress. He was a bulwark against the void Silas had left. "Breathe," he murmured, a command as natural as the wind. Just breathe through it. Time dissolved into a haze of pain and effort. The sun beat down. A buzzard circled lower, then veered away, perhaps deterred by the man's unwavering stance. Eliza pushed, guided by an instinct older than fear, older than betrayal. Caleb's hands were there, supporting, receiving, and then a thin, indignant cry pierced the desert silence, sharper than the buzzard's screech. A girl, small, red-faced, impossibly alive. Caleb cradled her for a moment, his callous thumb brushing a smear of vernix from her cheek with gentleness that made Eliza's throat tighten. He swiftly cut the cord with a clean knife from his belt, wrapped the tiny form in a clean, faded bandana from his pocket and placed her carefully on Eliza's heaving chest. The weight was minuscule, yet immense. Life in the midst of desolation. Eliza's arms closed around her daughter, tears finally breaking free, hot and silent, mingling with sweat. She traced a downy head, the perfect curve of an ear, hope, fragile as a desert bloom after rain. But beneath the surge of fierce love, the cold dread remained. Silas had tried to kill them. This new life was another burden, another target. She looked up at Caleb, his face unreadable in the slanting light. "Thank you," she breathed, the words thick. Caleb merely nodded, his gaze sweeping over the children clustered around, their faces etched with awe and exhaustion. He rose, retrieving his canteen and offering it again. "Drink, all of you," while they shared the precious water. Sparing sips for Eliza, he moved to his horse. He returned with a larger canvas water bag and a small sack. Inside were strips of jerky and hard biscuits. "Eat slow," he instructed Tom, who distributed the meager fare with solemn care. As Eliza chewed a strip of tough jerky, the salt sharp on her tongue, a memory flashed, unbidden. Silas, months ago, backhanded her across the kitchen for wasting salt on stew. His eyes, cold and satisfied as she crumpled. The taste turned to ash. She clutched her daughter tighter, the baby rooting weakly against her skin. This child would never know that casual cruelty. The resolve hardened, cold and sharp as Caleb's knife. "Can't stay," Caleb stated, scanning the darkening horizon where purple bruised the edges of the sky. "Night comes fast. Cold. Coyotes." He looked at the broken wagon, then at Eliza, pale and trembling, the newborn at her breast. "My wagon's sturdy. Can carry you all." He didn't ask. He simply assessed and decided, his authority quiet but absolute. Gathering their strength was a slow, painful ballet. Caleb helped Eliza stand, her legs buckling, the world tilting. He supported her weight effortlessly, his arm a solid brace, while Tom gently lifted Lily and Sam into bed of Caleb's sturdy farm wagon, hitched to a patient draft horse. Ben scrambled up beside them, clutching the near-empty water bag. Caleb spread his own bedroll in the wagon bed, then lifted Eliza as if she weighed nothing, settling her and the baby onto the thick wool. His touch was impersonal, efficient, yet devoid of the roughness Silas always carried. As he covered her with a coarse horse blanket, his hand brushed her arm. Eliza felt the faint ridge of scarred tissue beneath his sleeve, a pale line against sun-darkened skin, a remnant of violence, his own ghost. Perhaps. He climbed onto the driver's bench, gathering the reins. Tom perched beside him, rigid with borrowed responsibility, his eyes constantly scanning the darkening desert. The wagon creaked into motion, a slow, rocking rhythm that soothed the baby but jolted Eliza's aching body. The desert stretched endlessly, shadows pooling in the washes like spilled ink. The air grew colder, the day's furnace heat leaching away into the vastness. Eliza drifted, exhaustion pulling her down, the baby a warm ember against her skin. Fragments of Caleb's low-voiced conversation with Tom drifted back. Place called Iron Creek Ranch. Been there 10 years. Alone. A pause. Long. Then quieter. Wasn't always. The words hung in the cooling air, heavy with unspoken history. Eliza pictured a woman. Children, maybe. A loss etched into the lines around his eyes, into that quiet competence. He understood abandonment, she realized. Not the same as Silas's calculated cruelty, but lost nonetheless. It forged a fragile thread of understanding. They traveled in near silence, broken only by the wagon's groan, the horse's steady plod, and Sam's soft, sleepy whimpers. Ben curled against Eliza's side, his head heavy on her shoulder. Lily clutched the edge of the blanket, her eyes wide open, reflecting the first stars pricking through the indigo sky. Tom remained vigilant beside Caleb, a small sentinel against the encroaching dark. Then a flicker of movement. Far to the south, Near a jagged ridge silhouetted against the fading light, a pinpoint of orange, a campfire. Tom saw it too. He stiffened, pointing a shaking finger. Mr. Hart? A fire. Caleb reined the horse to a gentle halt. He stared south, his profile stark in the twilight. His hand rested lightly on the rifle scabbard mounted beside the wagon seat, a long-barreled Sharps, not the missing Winchester Silas had taken. Could be anyone, he said, his voice flat. Drifter, prospector. But Eliza knew the direction was wrong for Mesquite Flats. Silas had ridden south. A cold certainty settled in her bones, colder than the desert night. The relief of the baby's safe birth, the fragile warmth of the blanket, the solid presence of Caleb Hart. It all seemed suddenly thin, insubstantial. Silas wasn't just gone. He was out there, watching, waiting. Had he seen Caleb find them? Seen the wagon leave the broken-down site? The campfire was a beacon, not of warmth, but of menace. A reminder that the desert's emptiness wasn't protection. It was concealment. Caleb flicked the reins, urging the horse forward again, his gaze fixed ahead on the unseen path to Iron Creek. But his knuckles, where they gripped the reins, were white. The hopeful ember of safety, momentarily kindled in the wagon bed, guttered under the chilling wind of that distant, watching flame. The journey wasn't over. The desert held more than just coyotes. The wagon creaked to a halt beneath a sky dense with stars, cold and sharp as splintered glass. Iron Creek Ranch materialized from the darkness, a low-slung adobe cabin, its walls the color of dry blood in the moonlight, a sagging barn hunched beside it like a sleeping beast, and a corral holding 2 patient horses. A thin plume of wood smoke rose from the cabin's stone chimney, the scent a tangible promise of warmth against the desert's deepening chill. Yet, the isolation was absolute. The buildings crouched in a shallow basin, surrounded by scrub and rock-strewn hills that offered 1,000 places for watching eyes to hide. The distant campfire's orange eye, glimpsed hours ago, seemed burned onto Eliza's vision. Caleb moved with unhurried efficiency. He lifted the children down first, Sam, half asleep and whimpering, Lily, shivering violently, Ben, stumbling on numb legs. Tom scrambled down himself, his gaze instantly sweeping the dark perimeter, lingering on the shadowed hills to the south. Caleb then turned to Eliza, still cradling the newborn in the wagon bed. He didn't speak, just offered his hands. She hesitated, the vulnerability of her position, weak, dependent, holding a fragile life, warring with the desperate need for shelter. Placing one hand in his, the other fiercely protective around her daughter, she let him help her down. Her legs nearly buckled, his grip tightened, steadying her, the callous strength of his hand a stark contrast to Silas's punishing grip. He guided her, half supported her weight, towards the cabin door. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of wood smoke, cured leather, and old dust. A single oil lamp cast a fragile pool of light on a scarred wooden table, a cast-iron stove, and 2 narrow cots pushed against the far wall. Sparse, functional, a man's solitary world. Caleb gestured toward the rocking chair near the stove, its cushion worn thin. "Sit." He stoked the fire, adding a log, the flames leaping to cast dancing shadows. He pulled a heavy quilt from one cot and draped it over Eliza's shoulders. The weight, the sudden warmth, almost undid her. The baby stirred, emitting a tiny, mewling cry. "Needs feeding," Caleb stated, not unkindly. He turned to the children, herding them towards the hearth. "Ben, fetch water from the barrel outside. Tom, there's jerky in the tin on the shelf. Lily, Sam, sit by the fire. Warm your bones." His quiet commands brooked no argument, yet carried none of Silas's venom. The children obeyed, Ben scurrying out with small pail, Tom locating the tin with grim focus, Lily pulling Sam onto the packed earth floor near the stove's warmth, their small bodies huddled together. Eliza fumbled with the buttons of her dress, her fingers stiff with cold and exhaustion. As she brought the baby to her breast, a wave of profound, aching tenderness washed over her, momentarily eclipsing the fear. Hope. She named her silently, the word a defiant spark against the darkness Silas had cast. The baby latched hungrily, a tiny, fierce insistence on life. Eliza leaned back in a rocker, the rhythmic creak a fragile anchor. Her eyes drifted closed, but the image of that distant campfire flared behind her lids. Silas wouldn't just let them be. He'd see her survival as defiance, an insult. A memory surfaced, sharp and unbidden. Silas, months ago, furious she'd spoken back to a storekeeper, twisting the plain silver locket she always wore, her mother's, containing a faded lock of her firstborn Tom's baby hair, until the chain bit deep into her neck. "Know your place, woman," he'd hissed, his breath sour with whiskey. The locket felt cold against her skin now, a reminder of ownership she'd escaped, but not the man who claimed it. She opened her eyes. Caleb was watching her, not the feeding child, but her face. His expression was unreadable in the flickering light, but the lines around his eyes seemed deeper, carved by a grief that mirrored her own, yet different. His gaze shifted to a small, framed photograph tucked on a rough-hewn shelf, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, holding a toddler boy. Both gone. The silence stretched, heavy with shared understanding of loss, though their ghosts wore different faces. He looked away first, busy himself filling tin cups with water Ben brought in. The night passed in a haze of exhaustion and wary vigilance. Caleb gave up his cot for Eliza and the baby. The children slept fitfully on bedrolls spread near the stove, Tom curled protectively near the door. Caleb himself sat in the rocking chair Eliza had vacated, his Sharp's rifle resting across his knees, his gaze fixed on the small, square window that faced south. The message was clear: "I'll watch." Dawn crept in gray and cold, revealing the ranch in stark relief. The adobe walls were thick, the door solid oak, but the windows were small, vulnerable. The corral and barn stood exposed. It was a refuge, yes, but also a potential trap. Caleb was up before first light. Eliza, stiff and sore but driven by a need to move, to do, joined him outside as he tended the horses. The air was crisp, biting, her breath plumed white. "He's out there," she said quietly, her gaze scanning the southern ridgeline. It wasn't a question. Caleb paused, currying the draft horse with firm strokes. "Likely." He didn't sugarcoat it. "Saw tracks near the creek, Ben, this morning. Shod horse. Headed this way, then circled back south. Didn't come close." He nodded toward the rifle leaning against the corral post. "Won't get close." Tom emerged from the cabin, his face pale but set. He went straight to Caleb. "Teach me," he said, his voice tight, "to shoot, to watch proper." Caleb studied the boy, the desperate determination in his eyes that mirrored his mother's. He glanced at Eliza. A silent question passed between them. Protect him or arm him? The desert offered no good choices. Finally, Caleb gave a curt nod. "All right, but watching comes first. Eyes sharp, ears sharper. See that bluff?" He pointed to a rocky outcrop west of the cabin. "High ground. You see anything, dust, movement, anything that don't belong, you holler. Loud. Don't go towards it. You holler and get back here. Fast. Understood?" Tom's chest swelled. "Yes, sir." He scrambled toward the bluff, a small, solemn soldier taking his post. The day unfolded with deceptive normalcy. Caleb mended a harness. Eliza, wrapped in Caleb's oversized coat, sat on the porch step in the weak sunlight, nursing Hope, her senses straining against a vast silence. Ben helped Caleb carry firewood, his movement subdued but willing. Lily played a quiet game of pebbles with Sam near the cabin door, her eyes constantly darting towards Tom's distant perch. The locket felt warm against Eliza's skin now, a talisman of her children, her real treasures. Inside the cabin later, while Caleb stirred a pot of beans on the stove, Eliza noticed a small wooden box on the shelf beside the photograph, carved with clumsy flowers. A child's handiwork. Caleb followed her gaze. He didn't touch the box, but his knuckles whitened on the spoon handle for a second. "My boy, Jacob," he said, the name rough in his throat. "Fever. Took him and Sarah both. 5 winters back." The simple words held an ocean of desolation. He'd known abandonment too, not by malice, but by the indifferent cruelty of the frontier itself. It forged a new layer of understanding. He wasn't just offering shelter. He was guarding against a kind of emptiness that had swallowed his own world. As dusk began to paint the sky in shades of violet and orange, Tom came scrambling down from the bluff, his face ashen, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He ran straight to Caleb and Eliza on the porch. "Ryder," he panted, pointing south towards the same ridge where the campfire had burned. "On the ridge, just sitting there on his horse, watching." Terror vibrated in his voice. Eliza's blood turned to ice. She clutched Hope tighter, instinctively rising, scanning the darkening ridge. Caleb moved like lightning. He snatched up the Sharp's rifle from where it leaned against the adobe wall, his movements fluid and deadly calm. He levered a cartridge into the chamber with a decisive clack that echoed in the sudden stillness. Stepping to the edge of the porch, he raised a long barrel, peering down the sights towards a distant ridge. Eliza strained her eyes. At first, nothing, just the deepening shadows, the jagged outline of rock against the bruised sky. Then she saw it, a silhouette, upright and unmoving on horseback, perched high on the ridge, stark against the fading light. Too far for features, but the posture, the arrogant stillness, it screamed Silas. He wasn't hiding anymore. He was announcing his presence. A cold dread, deeper than any she felt alone in the desert, settled in her bones. He'd found them. The fragile sanctuary of Iron Creek Ranch felt paper thin. Caleb didn't fire. He just held the rifle steady, aimed unwaveringly at the distant figure, a silent, immovable challenge etched against the darkening landscape. The message was clear, carried on the evening wind. "Come closer. I dare you." The standoff crackled in the cooling air, thick with the promise of violence. Silas, a dark smudge on the ridge, remained perfectly still, watching, waiting. The safety of the cabin porch suddenly felt like the edge of an abyss. The wind hissed through the scrub oak, carrying dust and the weight of the unseen rider's gaze. Caleb Sharp's rifle remained leveled, a stark black line against the violet dusk, unwavering. Eliza's heart hammered against Hope's tiny form. The baby's warmth a fragile counterpoint to the ice spreading through her veins. Silas, a dark smudge on the ridge, motionless, arrogant. He wasn't fleeing. He was savoring their fear. Minutes stretched, thin and brittle as old glass. The children huddled on the porch, frozen. Tom's hand crept towards the old skinning knife Caleb had let him wear at his belt that morning, a gesture of trust that now felt like a grim necessity. Lily clutched Sam, burying his face in her dress, her own eyes wide pools of terror fixed on the ridge. Ben stood rigid beside Eliza, a small, silent pillar of dread. Then, without warning, the silhouette moved. Not forward, not retreating. Silas slowly raised his arm, a deliberate, mocking gesture. He pointed, directly at the cabin. At her. The message was clear as gunfire. "I see you. You're mine." He held the pose for 3 heartbeats that echoed like drum beats in the silence, then wheeled his horse and vanished into the deepening shadows of the ridgeline. Caleb didn't lower the rifle immediately. He scanned the empty ridge, his profile sharp and unyielding in the fading light. Only when the last sliver of sun vanished did he slowly ease the hammer down and lower the barrel. The click was softer this time, but no less final. He turned. His blue eyes met Eliza's, the shared understanding chilling. The standoff was over. The siege had begun. "Inside," Caleb said, his voice gravelly. "Now." They moved like ghosts. Caleb barred the heavy oak door with thick timber, the thud resonating through the small cabin. He dragged the scarred table against it. "Ben, Tom, help me with the shutters." The small, high windows had heavy wooden shutters secured from within by iron brackets. The boys scrambled, their fear channeled into frantic action. Heaving the shutters closed and dropping the bars into place with solid thunks. The cabin plunged into near darkness, lit only by the flickering oil lamp and the glow from the stove's grate. Shadows leaped and danced on the thick adobe walls. The air grew thick with the smell of wood smoke, lamp oil, and fear. Caleb moved to a trunk near his cot. He lifted the lid, revealing not clothes but tools of defense. Boxes of .50-70 cartridges for the sharps, a worn but serviceable Colt Navy revolver, and a double-barreled Coach gun, its barrel stubby and menacing. He checked the Colt's loads, the metallic snick-snick loud in the tense silence. He handed the Coach gun to Tom. Know how to point it? Tom's knuckles whitened on the stock, but he nodded, swallowing hard. Good. You watch the door crack. Anything moves out there, you yell. Don't fire unless I say, or they're coming through. Understood. Tom nodded again, his jaw clenched. Taking position near the barricaded door, peering through a narrow gap where the table met the frame. Eliza sank onto the edge of Caleb's cot, rocking Hope instinctively. The locket felt cold against her skin, a reminder of Silas's claim. A memory sliced through the fear. Silas, drunk and furious, she'd hidden coins or flour, ripping the locket chain so hard the clasp broke, the delicate silver bending. Mine, he'd slurred, throwing at her feet. You and everything on you. She touched it now. The bent clasp a permanent flaw. Not anymore. The thought was a spark in the dark. Caleb approached her, holding the Colt Navy. He flipped the cylinder open, showing her the loaded chambers. Ever fired one? His voice was low, practical. Eliza shook her head. Guns were Silas's domain, instruments of his control and rage. It kicks. Hard. He demonstrated the grip, his large hands engulfing hers as he placed a heavy revolver in them. His touch was firm, impersonal, yet grounding. 2 hands. Sight down the barrel. Squeeze, don't jerk. His eyes held hers. You might need to. He didn't say to protect them. He didn't need to. The weight of the Colt was answer enough. It felt alien, terrifying, yet a strange power hummed in the cold metal. Justice. Defiance. She nodded, tucking it carefully beside her on the blanket within easy reach. Hope stirred, her tiny fingers brushing Eliza's wrist. Caleb moved to the shelf, touching the small card box beside the photograph of Sarah and Jacob. Jacob was near Tom's age, he said quietly, not looking at her. When the fever took hold, he fought, like a little lion. A muscle ticked in his jaw. Sarah held him, sang to him, right where you're sitting. His gaze swept the cramped cabin, haunted. This place that held the silence after, for a long time. He turned back, his eyes finding Eliza's in the dim light. The shared desolation of loss hung between them, but also a fierce, unspoken resolve. Not again. Not here. The night crawled by, measured and crackled the fire, Hope's soft whimpers in the tense stillness. Tom remained vigilant at the door crack. Ben sat cross-legged near Eliza, sharpening a stick with Caleb's knife, his movements jerky but focused. Lily, her face pale but determined, hummed a tuneless lullaby to Sam, who finally slept curled like a small animal against her side. The cabin became a fragile fortress, bound not just by timber and adobe, but by the shared breath of 7 souls defying the void outside. Dawn bled gray and cold to the cracks around the shutters. Caleb lifted one bar cautiously, peering out. The world outside was eerily still. Frost silvered the hard-packed earth of the yard. He motioned for Tom to stay back, then slipped out, sharps in hand, moving with the silent grace of a cougar toward the corral and barn. Eliza watched from the cracked shutter, the Colt heavy in her hand, her breath fogging the cold air. He checked the horses, scanned perimeter, his gaze lingering on the southern ridge, now stark and empty in the weak light. He bent near the water barrel, examining the ground. When he straightened, his face was grim. He held up a single object, a spent .44-40 cartridge. Fresh. Winchester. Silas's gun. He came back inside, the cold clinging to his coat. He dropped the cartridge onto the table with a decisive clink. Close last night. Testing range. Or nerves. He didn't look at Eliza, but the implication hung heavy. Silas wasn't just watching. He was probing, preparing. The day became a grim routine of watchfulness. Caleb showed Eliza and Tom how to sight targets through the rifle loopholes he'd chipped long ago in the adobe walls near the windows. He assigned Ben the task of keeping the fire banked and water boiled, for warmth, for cleaning, for the unspoken possibility of treating wounds. Lily, with a quiet courage that surprised Eliza, took charge of Sam, keeping him occupied with pebble games inside the barricaded walls, her small voice a constant, comforting murmur. Eliza moved through the tasks, feeding Hope, preparing thin gruel from Caleb's dwindling oats, checking the Colt's weight in her hand, her fear hardening into a cold, clear purpose. The locket no longer felt like a chain, it felt like armor. As the second dusk approached, purple and threatening, Caleb took the sharps and positioned himself at the loophole facing south. "He'll come tonight," he stated, his voice flat, "under cover of dark. Thinks he can surprise us." He levered a cartridge into the chamber. The sound was a promise. "Won't." Eliza stood beside him, the Colt ready in her hand, Hope asleep in a sling against her chest. Tom held the coach gun near the door, Ben beside him with the skinning knife. Lily sat on the floor, Sam clutched in her arms. Her humming stopped, her eyes huge and fixed on the adults. The cabin was a coiled spring, charged with a dreadful anticipation. The wind had died. The silence was absolute, pressing in like a physical force. Then it broke, not from the south. From the west, near the barn, a sharp, splintering crack. The sound of wood breaking. Caleb's head snapped around. Tom gasped. Ben whimpered. Before anyone could react, a heavy thud shook the cabin door, followed by a voice, rough and unfamiliar, bellowing from outside. "Hart, open up. Man out here says you got his woman and kids. We're here to collect him." The heavy thud against the door reverberated through the barricaded cabin, shaking dust from the rafters. The rough voice outside, demanding possession, hung in the thick, smoke-laden air. "Hart, open up. Man out here says you got his woman and kids. We're here to collect him." Eliza's grip tightened on the cold but the Colt Navy. Hope stirred against her chest, a tiny flutter of life in the sudden stillness. Beside her, Caleb didn't flinch. His eyes, hard as flint in the lamplight, met hers for a fraction of a second. A silent message passed. "Hold." He moved with predatory silence towards the door, pressing his eye to the narrow gap Tom had been watching through. His Sharp's rifle, leaning nearby, seemed to hum with potential energy. "Only man owns anything here is me," Caleb called back, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that cut through the wood. "And what's mine stays with me. Ride on." A harsh laugh sounded from outside. Stubborn old cuss. Silas paid good coin. Said his wife's gone soft in the head. Run off with his property. Kids, too. We're just fetching what's owed. Another voice, younger, nervous, chimed in. "Just hand him over peaceful like Hart. No need for blood on your doorstep. Property." The words struck Eliza like a physical blow. Silas's voice echoed in her mind. "Mine. You and everything on you." The locket felt like a brand against her skin. She saw the faces of her children. Tom white-knuckling the coach gun, Ben trembling but holding his sharpened stick like a sword, Lily shielding Sam with her small body. Terror etched on their faces. Not property. Never again. The cold weight of the Colt became an anchor, solidifying the fury that burned away the last vestiges of fear. She shifted slightly, positioning herself squarely behind Caleb, the Colt raised, barrel pointing unwaveringly at the barricaded door. Her movement was deliberate, a declaration. Tom saw it. He shuffled closer to the door crack, the coach gun leveled, mimicking Caleb's stance. A small, fierce line of defense. Caleb's voice remained calm, deadly. Last chance. Turn your horses and ride, or bury your friends in this dirt. Silence stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then a different voice slithered to the gap, familiar and venomous, freezing Eliza's blood. Silas. He must have crept closer, while his hired thugs distracted them. Eliza. Her name was a taunt. Playing house with a hired help? Send out my children. Now, or I burn this rat hole down around your ears. The image flashed. Silas, a lucifer match scraping against rock, tossed onto the dry thatch of the barn. Panic threatened to choke her. But then she saw Caleb's hand, resting lightly on the timber barring the door. Steady, unyielding. She saw Tom's jaw clench, the coach gun steady in his hands. She felt Hope's warmth, Ben's shoulder brushing hers. Chosen family. Fortress. Eliza found her voice. It emerged low, rough, but clear as a bell in the suffocating silence. They aren't yours, Silas. Not anymore. You threw us away. Left us to die. You meant for us to die. She took a step forward, aligning herself fully with Caleb. You don't own me. You don't own them. You own nothing here but the dust on your boots. Ride on. A guttural roar of rage answered her. You bitch. I'll... The rest was drowned by the deafening blast of a shotgun, not Tom's coach gun. From outside near the barn, a startled yell, the sound of scrambling. Silas's voice, sharp with surprise and fury. What the hell? Caleb moved like lightning. He yanked the timber bar free and flung the table aside. Tom, cover the door, he barked, snatching up the sharps. He wrenched the heavy door open a foot, the sharp's barrel sweeping the moonlit yard. Eliza surged beside him. The colt thrust forward, her heart hammering against hope. Chaos greeted them. Two men, one burly, one lean and young, were scrambling away from the barn, where a ragged hole gaped in the wall. Near the water barrel, Silas stood exposed, his own Winchester half raised, staring in shock toward the barn. Standing framed in the splintered hole he'd just blown in the barn wall was a figure Eliza hadn't seen before, an older Paiute man, face like sun-cured leather, holding a smoking, double-barreled shotgun. He must have been Caleb's hidden ally, watching the western approach. He gave a curt nod towards Caleb. Silas recovered first. Hatred contorted his face as he saw Eliza standing defiant, armed, beside Caleb. He swung the Winchester towards her. Mine, he screamed. Two things happened simultaneously. Caleb's sharps roared, the sound like the world cracking open, and Eliza, driven by a primal surge of protective fury, squeezed the Colt's trigger. The heavy revolver bucked violently in her hands, the roar momentarily deafening, the flare blinding in the darkness. She didn't see where her shot went, only the blossom of red high on Silas's right shoulder as Caleb's bullet struck true. Silas staggered back with a choked cry, his Winchester clattering to the hard ground. He clutched his shoulder, blood welling dark between his fingers, his face a mask of pain and utter disbelief. He stared at Eliza, at the smoking gun in her hand, at Caleb lowering the sharps with cold precision, at the Paiute man stepping out of the barn shadows, shotgun ready. He saw Tom in the doorway, the coach gun still aimed, Ben beside him brandishing his stick, Lily's pale face peering out, holding Sam tight. The two hired men froze, caught between Caleb's rifle, the Paiute shotgun, and the unexpected defiance within and without. The burly one looked at Silas, bleeding and cursing, then at the grim-faced offenders. Ain't worth dying for, Silas, he muttered. He grabbed the younger man's arm. Come on. They turned and bolted for their horses tethered near the corral, scrambling into saddles and spurring away into night without a backward glance. Silas stood alone, swaying, clutching his bleeding shoulder. The arrogance was gone, replaced by animal panic and fury. He looked from the guns trained on him to Eliza's face, pale but fierce in the moonlight. There was no fear in her eyes now, only cold, hard resolve. He'd seen that look before, on men facing a hangman's noose. Defeated, he spat blood into the dust. "This ain't over, Eliza," he rasped, the threat sounding hollow, desperate. "You hear? This ain't over." He stumbled backward, then turned and half ran, half staggered toward a scrub oak where a single horse was tied. He fumbled with the reins, pain making him clumsy, casting terrified glances back at the silent, watchful figures. He finally hauled himself into the saddle, awkwardly, and kicked the horse savagely. It leapt forward, carrying him south, away from Iron Creek, swallowed by the moonlit scrub. The drumming of hooves faded, leaving only the ringing in Eliza's ears and the acrid smell of gunpowder hanging in the cold air. Silence descended, profound and fragile. Caleb slowly lowered the sharps. The Paiute man nodded again, a ghost of a smile touching his weathered face, then melted back into barn shadows. Tom lowered the coach gun, his shoulders sagging with sudden, overwhelming relief. Ben dropped his stick, burying his face in his hands. Lily began to sob quietly, holding Sam, who whimpered in confusion. Eliza's arm trembled violently. The Colt felt impossibly heavy. She let it drop to her side, the metal cold against her leg. She looked down at Hope, miraculously sleeping through the thunder, her tiny face serene. Then she looked at Caleb. He was watching Silas's retreat, his face unreadable, but his eyes held a grim satisfaction. He turned to her, his gaze sweeping over her, checking for injury, then lingering on her face. He saw the resolve, the exhaustion, the dawning realization of what she'd done, what they'd faced down. "Eliza?" Tom's voice was small, shaky. She turned, opening her free arm. Tom crashed into her, burying his face against her side, the coach gun forgotten at his feet. Ben followed, then Lily, still clutching Sam. They huddled together on the threshold of the cabin they defended, a mother and her children, bound tighter than blood by survival and shared defiance. Caleb watched them, the lines around his eyes softening. He stepped aside, giving them space. Later, after the children were settled, exhausted sleep finally claiming them near the stove, Eliza stood on the porch with Caleb. Dawn was a faint promise on the eastern horizon, painting the sky in streaks of rose and pearl. The air was clean, sharp, scoured of gunpowder and fear. Hope slept in the crook of her arm. Caleb leaned against a porch post, his sharps close at hand, his gaze scanning the silent, empty land. He might come back, Eliza said quietly, not a question, but an acknowledgement of the harsh world they lived in. "He might," Caleb agreed, his voice low, "but he knows the price now." He looked at her, then at the sleeping infant. "You stood your ground, fired that Colt like you were born to it." Eliza touched the locket at her throat. The bent clasp was a reminder, but the chain held firm. "I fired for them," she said simply. She looked out at the ranch, the solid adobe, the quiet barn, the hills holding their secrets. It wasn't just shelter anymore. It was the place where they had fought for their future. "This land, it feels like it could be a home, if you'd have us." The offer hung in the cool air, tentative but hopeful. Caleb was silent for a long moment, looking not at the horizon, but at the cabin door where the children slept. He saw Sarah's empty rocking chair, but he also saw Tom's earnest watchfulness, Ben's quiet help, Lily's gentle care, Sam's trusting eyes. He saw Eliza's strength forged in fire. He saw family, not replacing what was lost, but mending the silence with new life. He nodded, once, a slow dip of his chin that carried the weight of a promise. "It is a home," he said, "for all who need it and who'll fight for it." Eliza let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The vast desert stretched before them, beautiful and treacherous. Silas was out there somewhere, a wound in the landscape. The frontier held countless dangers. But here on this porch, with the first true light warming the adobe walls and her children safe inside, Eliza felt the fragile, stubborn root of hope take hold. She cradled hope closer, the baby's name a silent vow whispered to the new day. The stars above were fading, but they still burned cold and distant, like promises yet to be kept. The fight was over for now. The living, the healing had just begun.